Thank you to everybody tuning in online. Welcome everybody in person to Flutter Atlanta. I just want to give you guys a quick heads up before we get started. I am using the mics in the ceiling, so if you say anything, people online can hear it, so don't say anything you would regret. And also don't make any weird noises because it'll go through the stream as well. To get started, my name is Emmett. I'm a manager of engineering here at Black Airplane. I have a background in native Android and iOS development, and I've been using Flutter for over 3 years now. I've built over 17 Flutter apps, and we have several more in progress. And I love Flutter so much that I often use it for my own personal projects. I also want to give a quick shout out to Black Airplane, which is where we're at right now. I want to thank them for the food and the beer. Black Airplane is a leading development agency in the Southeast, and we have a special team here that produces top quality work, and we're capable of building pretty much anything these days. So today we're going to be talking about exploring Flutter and why you should use it. This was actually the very first talk I ever did for the Flutter meetup. That was before we even had a YouTube channel, so there isn't the old talk on here. But I basically took the old talk because it was in high demand again and just updated everything for 2023. So let's get into it. First, what is Flutter? According to Flutter.dev, Flutter is an open source framework by Google for building beautifully native compiled multi-platform applications from a single codebase. And just to give it a quick comparison to its biggest rival, React Native, Flutter has now surpassed React Native. As of June 2023, on GitHub, Flutter has 154,000 stars compared to React Native's 110,000 stars. The reason I point this out is typically React Native has always been the top dog, and Flutter is always compared directly to React Native. But Flutter has been getting so much steam over the last couple of years that now we've officially passed React Native by a substantial amount. Yes?
You said that this presentation is based on a prior presentation?
Correct.
Do you know what that stat was when you did?
We were still ahead, but I believe it was 110K to 94K. Okay. So the gap is just widening since the last presentation. And the last time I did this presentation was towards the end of the year 2021, so almost 2 years ago. So we're going to dive into a bunch of Flutter's advantages. So here's just a full list here. I'll quickly go through these and then we'll dive into them in more depth. First, it's cross-platform. It has a rapidly growing community. It evolves quickly. It has an expressive and flexible UI, near-native performance. It is Google-backed. It uses Dart as a language, which we'll talk about more. Has hot reload, a huge package community via pub.dev. You're able to debug on multiple devices at the same time. And because it's cross-platform, we also have less and better testing. And then it is also future-proof. So let's dig into these. First off, Flutter is cross-platform. What does this really mean? At the beginning, Flutter started as a means to build mobile apps for both Android and iOS. Over the years, Flutter has really evolved from that. Now Flutter is 100% stable in Android, iOS, web, all three desktop platforms being Linux, macOS, and Windows, and then also have here listed as embedded systems. What does Flutter typically refer to as embedded systems? All of the apps on the Google Home devices are pretty much built with Flutter now. So there's a wide range of devices that you can run this on. Pretty much everything you could want these days. We'll get into when it makes sense more in depth a little bit later. Next up, let's look at the rapidly growing community. So I chose two stats other than the stars to show here. On the left, this graph is percentage of Stack Overflow questions that month. And you can see Flutter's quick rise on Stack Overflow compared to its main competitor. This is really important because if you're a developer and you're looking for answers, you want a lot of questions to be asked about your framework. There's almost no question you can ask nowadays that isn't going to have some answer on some forum for Flutter. Next, I wanted to give a shout out to the Flutter Meetup Network, which is something that we are a part of. If you don't know, this meetup is Google backed, and Google actually pays for all of our meetup fees and gives us all sorts of resources to help us create this content. And Flutter is now very worldwide with over 132 in-person meetup groups across 62 countries and over 75,000 members. So this is Google showing that they're investing heavily in not only Flutter, but the communities around it and the education for it. Next, I want to point out supporting new features quickly. We all probably just watched WWDC and saw all these cool new features coming out. I want to go back to the last Apple release because this is something that we get asked often. iOS 16 in the last Apple release came out on September 12th. As you can see, live activities, which is where you have those notifications pop up on iOS that show things as they're actually happening. Within almost 2 weeks, we had a package on pub.dev that was made by an individual contributor ready to happen. So when you're looking at lag time between when a new feature comes out natively on iOS and being able to implement it without you having to do any of the underlying work, there's a real life example of that happening in just about 2 weeks. So the lag time between having the access to the newest features is going down more and more. Speaking of pub.dev, pub.dev is basically Flutter's version of NPM, but it's very well maintained so far. There's 33,000 packages that we have access to, and there's pretty much a package for anything you can imagine at this point. And they're also very good at telling you when it was last updated. You're able to see how many people are using it, all the things that you would like to know when you're deciding whether or not you should use that package. Yes?
Some of the packages themselves that you have up there, are they source visible? Can you see what they did? Done?
Pretty much all of them. I actually am not sure if I've ever come across one that wasn't source visible. They normally on the right sidebar, they have a GitHub link that you can click there. Most of these open source repositories actually use that for their issue tracking too. So if you find an issue with the package, it's very easy to look up the package, go to their GitHub, and write them a new issue right there. Next is expressive and flexible UI. This is something that Black Airplane has especially taken advantage of. Of course, out of the box, you have a couple UI libraries like Cupertino and Material, and now we even have the one for Windows, which names escapes me right now.
Maui?
Which one?
Maui?
I think so.
Yeah, it's a Microsoft Adaptive User Interface or something like that.
Yeah. So you're able to start with all of these custom components, but if none of these match exactly what you need, you actually have per pixel control with tools like Custom Painter, if you ever have experienced that, which allows you to paint individual pixels based on interactions and also apply animations to them. As you can see here, Flutter is also designed to be responsive, to give you a first-class experience across all of the platforms that they are trying to provide. You have to be able to easily adapt to desktop or web UIs all the way down to mobile and even watch. And Flutter is very capable of doing that today. Next is performance. Performance gets better and better every year. This graphic talks about the very new rendering engine that they've built from scratch called Impeller. Flutter used to use Skia, but with Impeller coming out, the performance gains are going to be huge, especially on iOS. One of the lingering performance issues that a lot of people complained about with Flutter was on iOS startup, if you tried to run animation right out of the box, there would be some jank. What jank is basically a stutter in the animation at the very first startup. Once it's started up and everything is loaded with all of the shaders, then everything runs fantastic at 60 or 120 hertz, depending on what the actual device is capable of. But Flutter is not only exceeding in performance on mobile. With the release of the different web frameworks, we've started getting compared as well to Electron.js, which is the desktop version of React Native, if you will, for JavaScript developers, which allows them to build apps like VS Code and Slack and Discord. All of these were Electron.js apps. Very early on, when we were in beta, we were already smoking Electron.js with startup times and package sizes. So not only are you going to be able to feel confident building Android and iOS apps with it leading in performance, but you will be able to feel exactly the same way when building for desktop. Truly, where Flutter is lacking in performance still remains on web. For web, we compile to JavaScript, and Flutter is treated as a single-page application, which means you have a huge JavaScript bundle loaded the first time you go to the website. Once you've loaded the website, it's fine, but if you need those really quick response times, which is expected by modern web frameworks today, Flutter is not going to quite keep up with that. With that being said, Flutter is still a great option if you need a web admin panel, or even if you're building a web application. But if you're using anything with SEO, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, Flutter is not what you should be using for that. Next is an easy-to-learn language. We'll get back to this as well with some of the caveats of Flutter, and that is Dart. Dart is very polarizing whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing. What I will say is I've trained several Flutter developers at this point, and if you are coming from a Java, a Swift, or a TypeScript, or anything like that, Dart is going to be something that you pick up very, very quickly. Dart is also a very capable language, and it's coming out with all the modern features that you might love from other modern languages like a Kotlin, all the very nice to have functions. So Dart has really caught up. We're actually fully sound null safe as well, so you're starting to catch a lot of those errors that you would run into actually at compile time. So Dart overall, in my opinion, is actually a great language that has matured a lot since Flutter has released. Next is hot reload. Flutter will actually claim that this is the most loved feature about Flutter, and this is both hot reload and hot restart. Basically what hot reload is as you're editing code in your environment, you don't have to rebuild the entire app just to see what changed. You can just hit Command-S, or if you're on VS Code or an IDE that has auto-saving, it will just auto-save and rebuild the app right in front of your eyes. You don't even have to restart the application. And as you can see, that saves you an immense amount of development time. If you're coming from a native Android or iOS development experience, you're probably used to a couple minute build time sometimes. You would make a change in code and then have to sit there and wait for it to build before you can see it on your device. Here, where you're replacing minutes with 525 milliseconds or 462 milliseconds. It's so quick that we're able to do it on every code change and see it happen in real time. In addition to this, you also have hot restart, which essentially allows you to restart almost any code change beyond adding new dependencies without having to rebuild the app as well. So you can just restart that and it'll restart the entire process, which is great if you're also having state management, debugging issues, or whatever you're trying to accomplish. You can always do a hard restart instead of fully rebuilding the app.
And that comment pretty much applies to both Dart and Flutter proper.
Correct.
Okay.
And next up is run on multiple devices at the same time. This, depending on what you're building, could be extremely useful. This was from Flutter Interact, I think 1 or 2 years ago, and this is what they said was the Flutter Octopus. And really what this was trying to show is it running on every type of operating system at the same time from one device. So these are running 100% at the same time in a debug environment. If it crashed on any of these, you'd be able to see the error in the singular console. And this is just something that's really powerful. It's not something that I take advantage of every day, but if you were really trying to make sure that this was running across a whole bunch of screen sizes or different device types, you could run them all side by side and see how it interacts right there. Getting your hands on all of these test devices is a lot easier said than done, but I think this is a great demonstration of how it could be in an ideal world. Next is simplified testing and CICD. So with cross-platform, one of the other advantages is cross-platform testing. Now, if I'm writing unit tests, I don't have to write unit tests for an Android app, an iOS app, and a web app, and a desktop app. I can write the unit tests all in one place, and it covers the exact same code that's going to run on all of these different platforms. So if you're working on a project that has 90% code coverage or doing test-driven development, this is something that can save time immensely. In addition to that, over the years, we've gotten some really great CICD platforms. CICD, for those of you who don't know, stands for Continuous Integration, Continuous Deployment. So what this allows you to do is every time you're submitting changes to your code base, it will automatically run your tests for you, create builds, and make sure that nothing has broke along the way. We've actually had the CEO of one of the CICD platforms called CodeMagic. He actually came onto our meetup and spoke and answered a couple questions, which was great. But these were out of the box, built for Flutter, and they're so easy to learn because they have nice user interfaces. You don't have to learn everything you need to know about YAML setups to take advantage of this. So it is great for people who are new to mobile app development or trying to get into taking their apps to the next level with testing. Notable apps using Flutter today. I actually did a whole talk on just this where we looked at some of those, but just to throw out some big names so you know that it's not just a bunch of indie developers building apps. You have the My BMW app, eBay Motors, Google Pay, Nubank, Reflectly, which won an Apple Design Award, Rive, which is an animation system we've talked about here, whose actual entire editor, which looks like Adobe After Effects, was built in Flutter, and you can then use their animations that you export in your own Flutter apps. You have the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, Tonal, which is a high-tech workout system. I actually bought one, and I was super excited to find out that they have a Flutter app and many more. If you want to dig into these, you can go to flutter.dev/showcase and see all sorts of different products that have been built with this. So now let's talk about some of Flutter's disadvantages. First one, as I mentioned earlier, is Dart. Dart has always been looked at as it's not as common of a language. One of the largest remaining arguments to use React Native over Flutter is that it uses JavaScript. JavaScript is an extremely common language and a lot of people have a lot of experience with it. Dart right now is only used for Flutter. You can use it in an old Angular setup or even some backend setups, but really Flutter is the primary use case for Dart. It's also harder to build an experienced team due to it being a new language. This is finally changing now, where we're finally getting to the years where we can start asking for people with 2 or 3 years of Flutter experience. But especially 2 years ago when I originally did this, finding somebody with a couple years of Flutter experience was almost non-existent. And Flutter was changing so quickly then that it wasn't always extremely relevant either. The next disadvantage is Flutter uses a canvas to render on every platform. This is specifically a big deal with SEO on web. If you are going to go and look at a Flutter website and do an inspect element and actually see the DOM that makes up the website, it's really just a canvas element with gesture detectors that are going to edit it. Yes, Brad?
Yeah, just a quick, does that affect accessibility in the same way, I imagine?
They have found some workarounds for accessibility. They have, I think, what do they use? They use like a semantics approach to still make it screen reader capable, from my understanding.
So there's an accessibility tree still.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, but specifically the actual HTML tree struggles with the Googlebot actually understanding what's on the page. So there's been a whole bunch of people that are working to figure out workarounds to this. There's actually an open issue. It's one of the most upvoted issues on the Flutter repository. People have basically resulted to rendering text underneath the canvas that matches the text that they're showing. And it's just not a great use case. If you're at that point trying to work around the SEO issue, learn a modern web framework and build the app or build the website the appropriate way.
Does anybody find it ironic that Google, who relies on SEO to make things work, is putting a product out that has problems with it?
Well, they did just have their AI release at Google I/O, and they pretty much said that SEO is dead. So I, with my conspiracies, I believe that the Google team were just like, we're not going to prioritize this. I think SEO is going to die anyway. Nice. I don't know how legit that is, but it seems to line up. Next is occasionally having to write your own native integrations. This is happening less and less. We've done some really cool ones here where we've needed to interact with a specific Bluetooth printer or a specific card reader. But with 33,000 packages on pub.dev and growing every day, the chances you have to write native Android and iOS code to interact with a package or a device is going down each day. But if you need to, it is actually an advantage that you still have the ability to do that. Next, rapid updates require constant management. Flutter's gotten a lot better over the last 2 years about this, but it has not gone away in any sense. This is part of the reason why you need a CICD platform. Even if you are not writing code that's getting merged in every day, you should have a system that's set up to run nightlies with the latest version of Flutter. Because we've had multiple apps over the years where everything will be building fine, will be done with work with a client, and then all of a sudden a new version of Flutter will come out and it will break. A lot of times it's just analyzer issues or linting issues, but either way we want to know so that way we can go and fix that problem before it gets out of hand. So what are some ideal use cases for Flutter? One is going to be needing the user experience to be the same on every platform. This doesn't have to be the case, but a lot of times for user testing, this is actually an advantage. You do have the capability on Flutter to show Android-only modals or iOS-only modals and be able to get that kind of breakdown and show it with their native UI, but a lot of times it's an advantage to have it look exactly the same across the board. Next is you might need to be able to build out and support a cross-platform application with a small team. If it weren't for Flutter, if you were going the native Android and iOS route, you would need a web team, an Android team, an iOS team, a backend team, and now This allows you to support all of these off of just one very small team. Or maybe you need to be able to build out an application for faster and cheaper than native. This is a reason that Black Airplane takes a huge advantage of it here, is for our clients, a lot of times they don't care what the tech stack is that's built in, as long as it's a high quality experience and it delivers what they're looking for. Flutter allows us to do that because we're able to use less resources. Also, if you needed a highly customized UI for your application, again, we talked about earlier, having per pixel control with custom painter and custom animations. You are not just locked into native elements from any specific platform. You can truly, per pixel, build out your own buttons, build out your own switches. You can build pretty much anything you would want with 100% pixel control. Maybe you want to launch on more platforms in the future without having to rebuild your entire application. We've talked to people before that maybe they only want to target iOS or only Android or maybe even only web. But if you were to build out in Flutter from the beginning, the transition from web to mobile app or iOS to Android is very minimal versus building in a completely separate framework and rebuilding the entire app later on when you decide it's time to launch for more platforms. Next is just minimizing the number of different tech stacks your development team needs to support. Now you can look for only one type of developer instead of having to have an Android and iOS again. And also, maybe you just want to streamline your CICD and testing process. The CICD process for a cross-platform application, if you're building all independently, can get very complicated, ensuring that versions release at the same time with the same features and making sure that happens seamlessly. With some of these CICD platforms and building it all off of one code base, that huge technical challenge becomes a lot easier. Use cases where you should not use Flutter. The first one that I talk about all the time is if SEO is a priority for the website you want to build. There's an open issue on GitHub for this, which we talked about earlier, and also some examples of applications that might need this are going to be marketing pages, e-commerce platforms, or even shareable content because you can't get those thumbnails very easily of the content you're sharing on social. The next one, which we talked about a little bit earlier, is if you want to use a platform with the most cutting edge features right away. As I talked about earlier, this has gotten a lot better. Only having to wait maybe 2 weeks of not doing any work yourself before you get to use a nice package that allows you to use the latest features. But still, if you're looking on the release day or even pre-release to be able to start experimenting with these features, you're either going to have to do the work yourself to be able to interact with the new features on Flutter, or just use the native library itself. So last, how is Black Airplane using Flutter? Nowadays at Black Airplane, for mobile, we are a completely Flutter shop. We've built over 15 Flutter apps here, and several of them have web components. Either the full feature set matches web, or we may have built out a web admin dashboard. And with Flutter, we're building award-winning applications. We've won Clutch's top mobile app developers. We've won a W3 award for the travel category, and also the best faith-based. And also, our team is growing. If you're looking for a job with Flutter, we're actually hiring for the senior Flutter developer position right now. So if you're curious, message me and we'll set up an interview. Next time, we're going to be talking about how widgets are rendered in Flutter. But does anybody have any questions?
Can we go back to the one slide that you had about the benefits for Flutter for a second?
The use cases or the overall benefits?
I think one back. One more. Oh, go. It was a list of why you want to use the packages. Why you want to.
This?
No.
No, go forward.
It was like, no.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's hold it here for a second. Okay, so the second bullet, second column, minimize the number of different tech stacks for your development team needs. And so this is kind of an open-ended question, right? Because, you know, when I see something like Flutter, to me, it's one of those, it's like a drawer full of utility knives, right? Flutter is a knife in the drawer. And so I can see where if you go down a path sometime and something happens and it works fine on Android, but it doesn't work on iOS, you still have to have some type of intelligence or experience to kind of troubleshoot below the level of Flutter. Have you ever experienced something like that, or have you ever seen that type of a thing happen?
Yeah, so typically with all the apps that we ship here, we'll include something like Firebase Crashlytics. Another option would be something like Sentry, which is just going to let you know in the field if something is breaking. There is so many different types of Android devices, from different screen sizes to different hardware to things that you can't even get in the United States that I haven't even heard of. Crashlytics allows us to be able to figure those things out. A lot of the times when we have an Android issue breaking, it's not typically hard to fix. It's normally a versioning issue or a screen size issue. Sometimes they have very weird resolutions that we hadn't tested because we didn't think they existed. But you will, at some point, if you run into those issues, need the technical expertise to look at Android code and look at iOS code and debug it. I will tell you, we've built apps here with over 10,000 monthly active users, 99% crash free, without having to dig into any of those real issues.
Okay. And let's kind of play with the new Vision OS that just came out from Apple, right?
Yep.
It says, I want to write a Flutter app that somehow interacts with that type of environment. I can see that you might have to bind your app to a library or an SDK that this might not have been touched. You touched on the fact that there might be a package that comes out later. If you develop in a native platform, you have the context of writing a framework that you can use, a bundle, or you can bring it in through CocoaPods or whatever. You got Swift Package Manager kind of bringing in that process. Do you ever see the combination to where you write a Flutter app and you can bring in a library that is, C-based or something like this, or been compiled down with Clang to get things going?
Yep, so that's actually how a lot of the packages are made. So really, let's use Crashlytics for an example. The Crashlytics package isn't written 100% in Flutter. A lot of times they have their Crashlytics pod that they're going to now build this Flutter library on, and they basically have, I think it's called a pod spec, where it says this pod spec is going to include the Firebase Crashlytics underlying pod, and then we're going to use the Flutter system for basically sending requests down to the iOS layer, and then it returns the responses back up that we can interact with in Flutter.
Okay. Also, if you look at things through a JavaScript lens, you can write React Native, you can write React, you can write Node.js and become basically what they call a full stack developer type of a process. How do you see Flutter kind of laying into that full stack process?
I don't think Flutter will ever really want to be full stack. Flutter, from Google's eyes and what they have said, is this is a UI framework that's meant to build top-of-the-line UI experiences on any platform. And I think we're very close to really being able to say they're doing that in an excellent capacity. But full stack, there's no Node.js component of Flutter. We do build apps here where there is no real backend. Most of the backends that we build here will be a Laravel PHP app because we have the large Laravel team and we interact with those all the time. But for simple apps, the Flutter team is capable of just building it on Firebase. Firebase with Firestore and its authentication out of the box and the security rules you're able to put in place, in addition to the occasional Node.js cloud function, we're dangerous enough to build all kinds of things without having to really fully bring in a back-end team. But I do want to point out that the Firebase skill set is still separate from Flutter for being full stack.
Okay. Have you guys ever had to pick up an application that some other consultancy or project has started first and then kind of take it to the next level?
Yep. Again, the last one we did with that was quite a while ago, and Flutter was changing so much there. A lot of the times you would get Flutter code from somebody else. It's not going to be great normally. It was from like an overseas. Maybe that was one of their first Flutter apps, and the majority of the project is kind of a mess, and there's not a lot of documentation. But we have done it, and we have done our best to fix and improve it as good as we can.
Okay. And I'm still kind of playing with certain things here. Once you write a Flutter app and you compile it down to, I presume it produces an IPA or an APK file that's then deployed through normal processes?
Yep,
Okay.
the deployment process is completely the same.
Okay, all right. And then how are web packages deployed?
So the web packages are deployed, it's compiled down to JavaScript, and then you're gonna get a like index.js file. It's gonna be kind of in a hosting folder from what I've seen. I haven't dug into it too much, but you basically are gonna get like an index.html, a whole bunch of compiled down JavaScript files that are kind of impossible to read, and then you just host that on whatever your hosting service is.
Gotcha. So here's an interesting transitional question. So in the past couple of years, we're now at Flutter 3.1, if I remember right, or 3 point something?
3.10.
3.10. I know there was a 1 in there somewhere. So how hard, and you just brought it up saying, you need to probably refresh your packages, make sure something hasn't broken, somebody hasn't pulled the pin out of something that would cause something to break, right? Beyond the fact that you've got a executable binary already, right? How often do you find yourself having to go back and restitch this or pay attention to anything that changes?
To be honest, the majority of times we do updates, especially if we're actively working on a project, the code doesn't have to change at all. We upgrade because another dependency relies on it, and then we don't have to do any code changes. I have worked with a couple of packages over the years who all of a sudden completely change how the package works. So you're going to have, if you're picking up an app that's a year old and you go in and the first thing you do is just update all the packages and see if it runs, good chances it won't. There's going to need to be some level of refactoring. But the Flutter tooling is pretty good at being able to hover over what's changed, and it'll tell you this was deprecated or this was renamed to XYZ. You pull up the package documentation, and it's normally pretty easy to see what's changed.
Okay. So Microsoft, did the Xamarin thing for a while.
Yeah.
Right, and they've deprecated that. It's going to be end of life this year. We have a couple clients out there that are screaming at, saying, well, what do I do now? We've actually pitched Flutter as an idea for them. Some of them with a shorter timeline have looked at Maui. We were talking about that a second ago, to make things happen. Where do you see, or, it's kind of hard to read the crystal ball right now, I get, right? But where do you see, what happens with Google's relationship with Flutter over a long period of time? Do you think that if they ever decide to abandon it, they'll let it go out in the field and let the community manage it, or what do you think is going to happen?
Flutter, again, obviously started Google backed. I think I used to get asked this question a lot 2 years ago of what happens if
Google abandons
pulls
it?
the plug.
Yeah.
Because they were known for doing that on a whole bunch of different projects.
Yep.
At this point, from the get-go, they built Flutter to be open source. It's a huge open source thing. I'm sure at this point the majority of the code written might not even be by Google developers because it's so largely open source. With that being said, Google's own investment into Flutter is quite tremendous. Some of the apps that they've built are their flagship apps that are getting rebuilt with Flutter, like Google Pay. Google Pay is alone a huge company just in itself. And they've invested into that. They've invested into Google Home, all of those apps being built with Flutter. Their next generation operating system, which I don't even know if it's ever going to come out, but Fuchsia, they've said that the way to build apps for Fuchsia is Flutter. And you can do that now if you have access to the Fuchsia beta and everything like that. So in a way, there is a level of future-proofness right now. I think that something significant would have to change for Google to just be like, all right, we're just going to go shoot Flutter behind the house kind of thing. I don't think that that's going to happen. I think there would be a significant push to, all right, there's this new generation coming. How do we adapt Flutter to also build for this platform? Because that is going to be probably more beneficial for the whole community around whatever this new tech is. Let's just say that it's Apple Vision, right? Because this is now in a 3D space versus a 2D space, and there's a lot that changes there. Apple already came out and said that a lot of your apps will just natively be able to run on there. They did that on purpose because they can't afford to release this $3,500 piece of hardware and have nothing running on it. So already out of the box, your Flutter app, if normal apps will run on it, your Flutter app will as well. Now, how long will it be before we can take advantage of all the really cool 3D spatial features? It'll be however long it takes an individual developer to go build the library, the open source library for us to interact with.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
That's what I heard.
Sounds like a total recall response, 2 weeks. Okay, so let's say you've got somebody who wants to join Black Airplane and be a developer. And they go, I know, I've taken the college classes, I've done YouTube University, and I can write a small app. What is the biggest thing you can think of that's a hurdle for somebody to kind of get up to be proficient in writing a Flutter app?
Proficient in writing a Flutter app or working at Black Airplane?
Well, let's take the first question first, and we'll talk about the second one after that.
So proficient in writing a Flutter app, I think there's some big things that you need to make sure that you're doing to be able to go get hired from somebody at that level. First one is pick a state management, any state management, build your app with it, understand why you're using it, the advantages of it, and all of that. Because a lot of the Flutter questions out there are going to be state management related. Again, pick one. Pick Block, pick Provider, pick Riverpod, pick GetX. Understand how and why it's doing those things. The next thing is go build a lot of things. You're not going to get a great job if you just build a starter app, right? The way I got a job here at Black Airplane is, this was a long time ago, we were in a little dentist office over there, is I built 3 versions of an app in college that was pretty substantial. It had geo-tracking, it had payment platforms, it had geofencing, it had social aspects. I built all sorts of stuff, and that's taught me about all of the issues that I ran into with that. So when I was able to walk in here and show them that I built this application that performs at a decent level and is complicated, and I understood the portions of it, that is what makes you, in my opinion, a really good developer, is not only being able to build it, understand all of the issues that you're going to face with it. I regularly encourage people, don't go learn something to learn, right? Come up with something you want to solve so you have a reason, and then go build something. You're going to retain it so much better if you're excited about what you're working on and you're facing a real problem and you're learning to solve a real problem.
100%.
But you don't think that Flutter is going to give you any type of a challenge or deficiency in a particular thing that you want to do at this point? It seems to be fairly flexible or capable at this point, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's still, I learned Svelte Kit the other day because I needed SEO for a side project that I wanted to do. So I learned a whole new framework just because I couldn't afford this side project to suck at SEO. But that's a real problem that I had. It's a tech stack that I wasn't comfortable in, so I went and learned those specific things. I'm trying to do a lot with AI right now, and a lot of things with GPUs and having GPU access. So I'm learning things like Docker, I'm learning Python, I'm learning all about PyTorch and all these various things. And then I'm also calling the sales team at Google Cloud to beg them to let me have 1 GPU so I can just test my stuff. So there's all kinds of things that you're always going to be learning. It doesn't just stop at mobile apps. I will think that Flutter is one of the best things that you can learn right now, mainly because it unlocks you being able to build on any platform. Maybe you're not going to be able to build the best thing on every platform, but if you're coming out of college right now, if you learned Flutter, there's very few ideas that you could have where you're not at least going to know where to start. I'm going to build an AI app. Okay, I can build the app part. Now I need to go learn AI. It's not really a situation where you want to avoid the situation where you have to learn everything that you do. You need a starting point, so that way you at least have a foot in the ground, so then you can tackle the things that you don't know.
Did you want to answer the second part of that question?
At Black Airplane?
Yeah.
Black Airplane has a couple unique demands, I would say. A lot of our developers don't come from a development background. We have developers that were salespeople who we taught to develop. A lot of developers don't like being very social. One of the biggest things about Black Airplane is how transparent we are with our clients. So our developers are required directly to do public speaking with our clients, showing the work that they've accomplished. Those are things that not every developer are comfortable with. Just the small team, being able to work on a lot of projects at a single time. for us, it's starting to get better. We're starting to hit that company maturity where we're realizing having somebody on less projects actually gets that project more efficient. But there have been times where I've been on 5 to 6 projects. April knows this. We have other developers that have been on that or worse. Yeah, Brad at one point who worked here.
I mean, I used to work here. Speed is,
Yes.
if you want to be successful here, you need to be efficient, and speed is big,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
But yeah, being able to hop in and out of projects, being able to deliver on time estimates that you set, saying this ticket's going to take me 4 hours, you should have it done in 4 hours or less.
Okay.
Awesome. Let me scroll through the chat real quick. Flip game. Not sure if any of these are questions. Will you share the slide deck? Yes, I will try and make sure that that's available. This is going to be a shout out. We do have a website, flutterdevelopersatlanta.com. The website is built in Flutter, and it hasn't been updated in quite a long time, but it's open source. And I used to pitch this at every meetup. It's open source if you need a project to go learn on and would like to build out a better portion of the website, please do that. But Google chat or YouTube chat, if you guys have any questions before I shut this off, go ahead and send them now. Otherwise, did anyone else have any questions? All right. Well, thank you again. Again, next time we're going to be talking about how widgets are rendered in Flutter, which might have just changed now with Impeller. So definitely come see that. Thank you guys.